You are listening to a podcast from The Hindu.
In our way back to the camp, we stopped to view the celebrated observatory called the Jantar Mantar, erected in the third year of the reign of Muhammad Shah or 1724 by the famous astronomer Jai Singh or Jai Sinha, Raja of Ambher and founder of Principality of Jaipur. This monument of Oriental munificence and science is situated without the walls of the city, near 2 miles from the Juma Masjid. But work was never completed on account of the death of the projector and the subsequent confusions of the empire. The observatory was, however, sufficiently advanced to mark the astronomical skill and accuracy of the prince by whom it was designed, though it has suffered severely from the ravages of the Jots, who, not content with carrying off all the valuable materials which were portable, committed many wanton excesses upon the finest parts of the edifice. So Shobna, that was Major William Thorne, who was visiting Delhi in the September of 1803 during Lord Lake's campaign to conquer the independent principalities of North India. And this was from his diary, I guess, recounting his experience of what I completely corrupted in an anglicized accent or fake British accent called Jantar Mantar.
In an attempted anglicized
Absolutely attempt.
accent.
And also my perverse spellings, pronunciations of Jai Singh or Ambher and Jaipur. But this is our person today, our subject of interest, this Raja of Ambher and founder of Jaipur, Sawai Jai Singh. I am Jacob Koshi.
And I'm Shobna Nair, and this is the
Rearview. Here we dive into the history of things, events, discoveries, and inventions. He is an interesting man and ruler because we generally associate rulers of medieval India purely in the political context, in terms of whether they were against the Mughals or how were their alliances with other Rajas. Did they sufficiently try to ward off attacks and their contributions to the independence movement, etc. But we rarely look into other aspects of all of these rulers. And Jai Singh was an interesting person because he seems to be the first certified geek, data geek, scientific builder, astronomer, and who seemed to be really interested in what would then at that time be emerging science. But Jai Singh isn't somebody who you know for science. I mean, how do we better know him as?
We know him as the builder of Jaipur, the capital of Rajasthan. And if you were to look for his pictures, all you can see is one triangular man wearing...
Triangular?
Yeah, I mean, if you look closely just Google Sawai Jai Singh, and all you see is a side profile of a man wearing a sort of a frock coat, and it is and looking pretty triangular.
And does he have the proverbial flower in his hand?
No, he doesn't have and a luxuriant mustache, almond eyes, a turban. Most of us know him, at least the Delhi crowd would know him from the great Jantar Mantar.
Oh, Delhi crowd reminds me. Since you are a denizen of Delhi since forever, I'm sure the Jantar Mantar was one of those edifices which, school kids would be dragged to for their
Picnics,
yeah.
No, I don't remember going with my classmates, but I do remember my father taking me around. I must have been 10-year-old or something, but I have been there multiple times because every time a bunch of relatives came from Kerala, it was...
Let's go sightseeing.
Yeah, it was a given. These were the regular spots on the Delhi tour.
How did you make sense of whatever you have seen so far? Like, what meaning did it make
create
you?
much of an impression on me, and I quite didn't understand why did we have or how did it work? Because obviously we have very we don't maintain our monuments. It's not an interactive installation, or where there is enough information to inform us on how exactly it works, other than long
So
paragraphs.
maybe at this point, I'll just quickly give a brief summary, because I'm sure we have people listening in who are also wondering what exactly is this Jantar Mantar thing. Now that modifications are happening to textbooks, maybe it's good to give a sense of what exactly is this device. So the Jantar Mantar is just another kind of observatory. It is a medieval observatory that is constructed to tell you the time of the day. Now, this sounds extremely bizarre, but it's always good to remember that in the 1500s, 1600s, you still did not have clocks and watches. You had completely different ideas about how to mark time. This is a kind of an enlarged sundial, and it has markings, though, as you rightly observed, and if you actually were to look at this structure today, a lot of it has eroded. I mean, and because it is being by necessity, it is an open air construction. It is a stone and masonry kind of device, and because it has always been open to the elements for such a long. It's been like that for nearly 200 odd years, more than that. So it naturally is subject to the vagaries of time, and it is hardly able to deliver on the purpose it was for. Not only is it very anachronistic, but it literally, there are so many other instruments even during the time that the Jantar Mantar was built that could do a better job of delivering on what it was supposed to do. So using that, you could tell time. You could actually get a sense of the positions of particular planets and stars, and use it to compute astronomical tables. And there were actually multiple of these instruments. There were similar instruments in Jaipur, in Ujjain, which incidentally was our original Greenwich, what the Greenwich Meridian time to England is. Ujjain was where what they call the zero meridian, or where if you wanted to trace one solar day, or one day, this is where you start out. Okay, the sun starts from here, and we wait for a day, would be defined as when the sun comes back over here. That's what the zero meridian is. So Ujjain was a place. So again, Jai Singh actually built a couple of observatories there too, in Mathura too. So overall, a very prolific kind of builder.
And it is important here to note that we have very few sort of royal scientists or Indian royalty, who were interested in science, in funding science and creating such huge scientific
And this was actually a time when this was not even considered. It is 200 years even before the term science actually
emerges.
emerges.
Yeah. So, Jacob, what you read in the beginning,
Yeah.
Major William Thorne's description of the Jantar, the Jantar Mantar.
In fact, interestingly, the word, I mean, we all call it Jantar Mantar, but turns out that the Mantar is just, there's no use of the word Mantar. Actually, in all his texts, in Jai Singh's texts, or any references to these devices, they're just called Jantars,
Yeah, because Jantar in Hindi means an instrument.
and just an instrument. And there's no real reason why people just added mantra to it. Maybe there was this habit of, I don't know, Hobson Jobson kind of thing. You wanted to add a rhyming word to it, and the name stuck.
Yeah, so what I was saying is that the reading that you just read of Major William Thorne from September of 1803, this is actually a very important milestone year and milestone month in Delhi's history, because this is in September 1803, the second Anglo-Maratha War took place.
Okay.
To and British formally took control of Delhi, and Delhi from 1803 has been under
So that explains his journey towards all these conquered principalities and all that, right?
Yes. So before we get into Jai Singh's scientific endeavors, let me just give you a very brief pen portrait of who Sawai Jai Singh was.
So just before we continue, what's Sawai?
Yes.
One and a quarter. I mean, who calls themselves one and a quarter? Anyway,
Yes, but there is a story to it. But we'll go sequentially, Jacob. So be patient. Sawai Jai Singh was born on November 3rd, 1688, in the town of Amer in the state of Rajasthan. Uh,
oh, it's not Amber
no,
as
it's
Mr.
spelled Amber.
Major Thorn
but
was.
if I'm not wrong, it is pronounced Amer only. Yeah, so I've been to Amer Fort just a few months back. I was
That's how you nailed the pronunciation.
absolutely, unlike your attempted anglicized pronunciation in the
I was
beginning.
just being faithful to Major Thorn on a horseback.
I really doubt that. But yeah, so Jai Singh's early education was similar to that of any prince of his time. He learned Hindi, Sanskrit, Persian, and possibly some Arabic. And this is important because this will open his mind towards the knowledge available in across the globe, and because he did access, I mean, he was familiar with these languages.
That's interesting too. But was it typical for the average prince in India to actually get schooled in like 5 languages? Is it a normal thing?
Yes,
At that time.
at this particular time, because of the Mughals in Delhi, Persian is the language of bureaucracy and
Sure.
administration.
So the princes were
Were-
formally
yeah,
schooled in
were
these things.
schooled
Okay.
because Persian is like learning English is
Absolutely.
today, and because he is a Hindu king, so it is only obvious that he will learn Sanskrit, and of course Hindi being the language, or Hindi, or actually the Rajasthani dialect, whichever is prevalent there, would have been his lingua
So
franca.
they just not. It's not just they're only learning horse riding and riding elephants, and they also did some
Yes, okay.
academy studies.
That is another
Anyway, good to know.
that is another detour, and just hold on for a few minutes and I'll come to that also. Jai Singh displayed an interest in mathematics and astronomy at an early age. He had 2 manuscripts of on astronomy copied for him when he was only 30.
Wow.
And apparently you can still see these manuscripts in the museum of Jaipur. But his formal education was cut short at the age of 11 when his father died, and he had to take charge of the administration. He ascended the throne of Amir on January 25, 1700. Now I'll come to the question you asked as to why he is called Sawai. The story goes, in 1699, when he was 8 years old, Jai Singh met Aurangzeb at his camp near Agra. Now, you just have to use your imagination.
Yeah, he's a bad guy. I mean, Aurangzeb is our classical bad guy of
without.
contemporary history.
Yeah, and contemporary this television.
Yeah.
Mostly the movies, the way he has been portrayed, without any shades, any other shades other than deep, dark black. Anyhow, so but use your imagination. Aurangzeb must be this towering person with probably a deep
And
voice.
there's an 11-year-old
An
next to him.
8-year-old.
8-year-old?
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay.
Yeah. And he asks Jai Singh, probably gruffly or probably in a mock anger, who knows, now what will you do? And Jai Singh replied, nothing, I'm in secure hands. So he was a smart aleck even when he was
He was composed
barely
and
8.
very.
Yeah, very even tempered. So Aurangzeb was very impressed by his intelligence and he called him Sawai, or as good as 1 1/4. So ever since then, the title was formalized as per an edict granted by the Mughal Emperor Farooq Siyar in 1713. It has been used by all Jaipur rulers together with the practice of flying 2 flags, one full and one quarter sized, from the top of the city palace whenever the head of the family is in residence. I hope that answers your question, Jacob.
Absolutely.
Also, the thing that you had raised about whether all these Rajput kings, all they did was horse riding and learning sword fighting. Apparently, again, the British are to be blamed for this, building this kind of,
Just emphasizing or these
yeah,
aspects,
this
the martial
narrative,
aspects.
yeah, this narrative. So apparently the temptation to overplay the valor and chivalry of the Rajput is a legacy of early 19th century English historian James Todd, who almost single-handedly cast them as warrior heroes in the European imagination. He referred to them as the Herodotus of the history of Rajasthan. It was Todd who helped construct the martial race theory, according to which only certain Indian communities were suitable for recruitment into the Indian army. And
I guess also to amplify, for whatever reasons, their distinctiveness as a culture, as a people, opposed to the Mughals who were the ruling.
India was like a 1,000 piece puzzle, no? So they were trying to put it all in
Yeah.
nice brackets just so that they were trying to organize almost Marie Kondo India in a way.
Oh,
Yeah, I
the
mean,
cleaning up.
yeah. So the poorest Rajput. This is what Todd wrote in his two volume Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan, published in 1829. He wrote, "The poorest of Rajput of this day retains all the pride of ancestry, often his sole inheritance. He scorns to hold the plough or to use his lance but on a horseback." In these aristocratic ideas, he is supported by his reception amongst his superiors and the respect paid to him by his inferiors. Now, it is important because our central character, Sawai Jai Singh, stands in contrast because he's not just a man on the horseback. He's a polyglot.
Maybe he's got that quarter extra that is adding
Yes.
to everything.
Yes. So tell us, I mean, was he really serious about his astronomy?
Absolutely. So, this time is also one of the most interesting periods as far as astronomy itself is concerned, because there were several developments happening within continental Europe. Now, India has also always had a very proud tradition of astronomy, but it actually wouldn't be very right to call it astronomy then. It was more geared towards astrology. So this was the principal purpose, really, of of astronomers and astrologers: compute the motions of the sun, the moon, the planets, and certain special stars, also that it is important in marking out festivals or religious rituals and practices. And the timing of all of these activities were deemed extremely essential, which is why you had all these court astrologers, and basis their interpretation of how the planets and things are moving, they are also gave forecasts or divinations to the emperor, who's to ask them, should I go for battle today or should I do that? And these guys would just cook up stories basis, whatever planetary alignments were there. So that was the primary purpose of measurement and creating tables. But in continental Europe, you had this to some extent, but there was also a different utility that was being drawn from astronomical tables. That is, you had far more voyages across the oceans. You had more traders who were often in large ships stuck at, when you're in the ocean, it is absolutely very almost impossible to determine where exactly you are, and all you have are the guidance of the stars. So there
Yeah,
was
because Columbus had already a century before the time that we are talking about had already traveled to the American continent, right?
Yes, yeah. So they always had different kinds of instruments. I mean, there were more portable instruments called the astrolabe. There were sextants that came out much later. So all of these told you different things like the latitude. They also told you that the positions of relative to, you could calculate where you are relative to what these instruments told you was the position of popular stars like Polaris or the well-known constellations. So that is the one impetus that was happening over there. And even in Europe, because of this you had these early astronomers, Tycho Brahe, etc., who had similar instruments like what Jai Singh probably built much later. And they built, for them, accuracy was absolutely important. They had, just like how we collect data for all kinds of analysis today, they collected data on planetary movements as stellar movements. And it was basis on these tables that they had to make predictions on when is this next eclipse or when is this next event going to happen. The same impetus was in India, but India never had this seafaring kind of thing, because of which influenced astronomical tables. In fact, what is called Hindu astronomy, Brahmagupta, etc., they pretty much had this peak, in the early 10th and 11th century, where they just did not venture forth into, they thought that everything that is to be known is already known, and all we had to do was just, make minor computations and improvements. So in fact, this whole 15th century and 16th century, there was a fundamental revolution, what is now people would refer to it as the scientific revolution, because primarily aided by the development of the telescope. So this is the general spirit that is happening in India, and I guess that is, here's a person who's reading Persian, who's reading, being schooled in various languages.
But was Jai Singh's interest in astronomy or astrology, as you
There
put
was
it,
no,
was it just for religious reasons alone, or did he become sort of academically obsessed with?
It turns out academically obsessed, because I guess many of his predecessors or the average ruler of a principality would outsource all of these things, or not really dwell on these things beyond asking their the court astrologer for insight. But we don't know what really gripped this guy, because on the other hand, there was also this whole impact of what is called Islamic astronomy that was that had taken root, and this had placed a lot of emphasis on lunar movements. There was the religious aspect of this too, but there was also questioning basis the data that was coming out on why certain planets did not have really exact movements. They were questioning the basis of of their observations itself. And in many ways it was very similar to European astronomy, and I guess this ideas were there, and probably a guy as naturally curious and geeky, for the lack of a better word of it, would have become aware of this. He had become aware of these instruments, and he had a proclivity, I guess, towards it. I guess there have been other kings and rulers, who, what we know about, had some of them had artistic sides, some of them were connoisseurs of music, So I guess he's one of those exceptions, or that we know little about, who really had an interest in and this was the emerging science. It's like somebody today being interested in AI or
but I think it was a little more than that interest, right? His interest was also about calculating
the tables,
the inaccuracy of the calendars.
Absolutely. So this all boils down to calendar. It's when you're making calendars, you become aware of discrepancies, and which is very natural. Going back to our old episode on time, when you're measuring, you can define a day either by the amount of time the Earth goes around the Sun, or how the time taken by the Earth's motion relative to any particular distant star, and you have to combine it with seasons, and then you realize the needs for leap year and all kinds of different things. So it's when you're making calendars, all of these discrepancies come about, and you're always trying to fix discrepancies. But it's around this time that people actually started then wondering about what were these discrepancies and what did it reflect upon the motions of planets. There were the early ideas of, I mean, it was then pretty much set in stone that everything revolved around the Earth, but there were the Copernican revolution, for instance, in the 16th century, where he proposed the idea that it was the sun around which all of the other planets orbited. But even learned astronomers did not agree with that idea. There were some who said that there was a geo-heliocentric model where some planets revolved around the sun, but overall they all orbited the Earth. It's like you're trying to fit your observations so as not to mess with the existing structures. But I guess all of these things were talked about. He's hanging around with astronomers and astrologers, and I guess these ideas are kind of being percolated. He encouraged a lot of them. He commissioned a lot of astronomers to make these calculations, make these tables, as well as doing his own work on it.
Jacob, you very casually noted that he had all these people who were interested
In astronomy.
in astronomy just like he was. But how did this come about? As far as the history books tell us, Jai Singh was ruled in a moment of flux when
Aurangzeb was born.
In 1707. It is a milestone year in Indian history. After Aurangzeb's death, a war of succession has started. There's chaos everywhere. Delhi's there is no stability in Delhi, and which impacts all the principalities that sort of owed their allegiance to the Mughals. And
there's a lot of politicking going on.
Yeah, a lot of intrigue, a lot of politicking going on. So in Jai Singh's life, in his initial life as the king of Amir, in this moment of chaos, if there was a semblance of stability that arrived only when Aurangzeb's great grandson Muhammad Shah was installed as the emperor in Delhi.
Is this the great Muhammad Shah Rangila?
Yes.
The fun guy from all the other podcasts that we binge on.
Yes, absolutely. He was also an
aesthete.
Yeah, absolutely. He loved his music. He loved his dance forms. He loved his paintings. He was
he's
actually
always
a Renaissance man in
He's always been
various
painted
ways.
as an eccentric guy and
almost painted as a homosexual in a very derogatory and a demeaning manner. But I believe he was a lovely metrosexual.
So I guess they would have got along well, right? Here is this artsy guy and here is a science geek,
But of course, because Muhammad Shah was more interested in non-administrative work, that gave Jai Singh a lot of leeway to expand his influence. And you have to remember when Jai Singh took over the Amir principality, his kingdom was shrunk down to 3,000 square miles, and his influence was very limited. But by the time Muhammad Shah comes to the throne, the passports issued in the name of the Raja were more respected than those issued in the name of the emperor. So obviously he was a man who knew his politics. Yeah.
So he seemed to have this some kind of rapport with Muhammad Shah. He basically made peace. He said that I get my principalities, I control the territory that I do, and in return, you person far away, I will respect you as overlord.
You enjoy your dance and music and
just let me be, so to say. So in fact, he wrote these, there were these astronomical tables and calculations. That was, those were like the precious books of the time, and they were all being generated primarily out of Europe, continental Europe, some of them from West Asia. And this is precious data to somebody who's as interested in astronomy. So in fact, he made his own tables, and Sawai Jai Singh noted that the astronomical calculations based on existing tables did not always agree with observations. So, in fact, he wrote this a petition. It's a preface, and it's called the Zij-e Muhammad Shahi, where basically these are planetary tables, and it is a practice of the time that when you make treatises or books like this, you dedicate it to the emperor. He is actually addressing in this way to Muhammad Shah, realizing that important affairs both regarding religion and the administration of empire depend upon these, and that in the time of the rising and setting of the planets and seasons of eclipses of the sun and moon, many considerable disagreements of a similar nature were being found. So he said this, and he used those very elaborate metaphors that people would use, like Muhammad Shah, whose standard is the sun, whose retinue the moon, lance is Mars, and Mercury. Very clever guy. So all of his sucking up was also in very planetary, using planetary terms and astronomy.
Organized.
Yeah, he was clever with his words.
But what is important here to note is, Jacob, from what really struck me from a book written by A. Rahman on Maharaja Sawai Jai Singh II and Indian Renaissance is the name of the book. And he mentions that though in this treatise, he doesn't explicitly say, but if you were to read between the lines, what he was trying to introduce was a secular calendar.
Something that combined, these, again, going back to what, Pope Urban was trying to do, or the Gregorian calendar that eventually came, that better explained these moments. He was trying to, improve things. And through these petitions and letters, he was also trying to get some kind of support, and which he actually did. I mean, Muhammad Shah acknowledged that you who are a person who is learned in these, in these sciences, please go ahead. And basis this, he managed to then get support, in many ways that helped him go on this, this building project of making a lot of these astronomical devices.
But why make such huge masonry instruments? Why didn't he? Now I'm coming back to what you had very casually mentioned, that he also had a telescope, or did he? Didn't he like not believe in telescopes, and he believed that they were not accurate enough?
But the thing with telescopes that time is, a telescope was this device that helped you, look at distant objects. That's okay. But it was not very helpful in precise identification. For that, you had this other development that came much later called the crosshair. I mean, the crosshair is what you would, literally the cross that you would see in any binoculars, and that helps you to focus on a particular point. And those actually give you graded measurements, like how in in our cameras you are able to set parameters of focus and aperture, etc. So that
two bisecting lines that appear in the middle of the center of your lens.
And the gradations that tell you, so that because for them these were important, in setting up the positions of objects. So he had his telescope, but the crosshair one version never actually made it to him.
So, Jacob, we began this episode by talking about Jantar Mantar, right? He may not have brought you any new discovery. He was not Columbus who was looking for a new continent. He was no Copernicus. He was no Newton who was telling us about gravity. But what he did had greater, what he did was also equally significant because he brought science to the people. When you build such huge masonry structures, what essentially he was doing was not just secularizing the calendar, he was bringing in the culture to make people start making the observations.
Yeah, first to actually you start wondering what the hell are these devices. Right? I mean, remember William Lambton going with his theodolite and scaring people off.
Yeah. And the fact that we still have these monuments, so that is a pretty significant
Yeah,
thing.
but it's very, I mean, to me, this is what I find very fascinating is that, yes, he was building all of these instruments and, he built it up in multiple places.
Locations.
But here was this guy who was very well learned, very scholarly, reading up on the latest stuff, collecting books, even imported ones. Now he's building up all of these things in the 1700s, and there is nearly a century worth of data and observations from continental Europe, where the astronomers have completely upturned the what was the classical view of the world, the whole heliocentric theory that we just alluded to. But in all of Jai Singh's writings, and we don't see any reference to all of this, what is called the whole Copernican revolution. Kepler, Johannes Kepler, who had given the laws of planetary motion, which even today, it is still the basis that tells you, that explains the kind of orbits that planets have and explains already why they appear at the locations they do. I mean, he seems to have completely missed out on all of those things. There's no references to it. Already by this time, people had stopped making stone and masonry kind of observatories. There were astrolabes and sextants. There were a whole range of devices.
Astrolabe.
An astrolabe is basically this very intricate, curious looking. It looks like a globe, but with all kinds of rings around it. Imagine a kind of having a Jupiter model of Jupiter in your hand or a Saturn in your hand.
One of those Dan Brown movies made on Dan Brown.
Oh, I'm sure it would have had one of
would
those
have
things.
those.
So, but again, it is one of those things that tell you time and latitude, and it's portable. You can carry these things around. Now, they were already the dominant, and the telescope. He's not heard of Galileo. Can you beat it? There's no reference in his works to Galileo. So it's almost like you've just gone straight from one era of the Dark Ages to just having missed out an entire thing. So this is a very fascinating thing, and and a matter of great mystery, and the only real explanation for this, as far as I could gather, or what the historian and scholar Virinder Sharma has mentioned, is the pre-colonial climate in India. So it was around this time that the vast majority of of European traders, or who had influence, were the Portuguese. And along with the Portuguese came the Jesuits, the Jesuit monks and Jesuit teachers. Now the Jesuit order in Spain, in Portugal, they were known as people who were very scientifically inclined. They were learned. They could they were interested in scholarly treatises, and naturally they were also interested in astronomy and developments in astronomy. Now, when the Jesuits were over here, they had a long history of patronage in Indian courts. Even Akbar has had Akbar, as well as Jahangir, have had interactions with these Jesuit priests and scholars. So, following all of these, those tumultuous political developments in Delhi, the Jesuits kind of lost favor for a while in the Mughal court. So they were looking for newer places of patronage, and they found this this very, very interested guy. And thanks to him, he actually thanks to their these interactions, Jai Singh actually funded some delegation of astronomers to go and visit places in Portugal, Lisbon, I guess, or several other places. Now, what is important over here is these were Jesuits and hardcore Catholics, whereas the whole Copernican revolution that happened was was very was heretical, was very, it had Protestantism as its his idea. It was set in the time
It
of
was the
Luther.
religion of the pagans.
Yeah, not only that, it is anti-Catholic.
Ah,
I mean, it is completely just as Martin Luther had dispelled ideas about in Christianity about people's relationship to God. Here was a complete set of revolutions happening where they had displaced the whole idea of the cosmic order. I mean, it was no longer the earth, it was the sun. The earth was just another planet. Now, all of these were heretical ideas to the Catholic Church. And this was the time the Catholic Church to suppress a lot of these.
So you were saying this scientifically minded man was brainwashed by Jesuits in not looking towards.
Remember, there's no science yet. Science has to wait for, science has to, the word scientist will come only in the 19th century, only around the 1800s. So the Catholic ideology was completely opposed to this. This was heretical stuff. I mean, we all know what happened to poor Galileo and how he had to face the Inquisition. Now, the Inquisition was something that was, it was carried out with a lot of fervor, even within India itself. All of the Goan Christians who the Catholic Jesuits had converted, they were very adamant and keen that heretical ideas should not spread among the newly converted in India. So there is a very real. So these European scholars were, I guess, forever debating with the Indian astronomers, and they disagreed with them on this and that, but they never disagreed on this, the geocentric, the classical model. And I guess this was information that ultimately then did not really make it to Jai Singh, because all said and done, he is not the guy who's physically visiting and interacting with people there, right? He only reads what he gets, what the experts tell him. So he probably just missed out on all of this. This was never privy to him. So he was not privy to these, revolutionary changes that were taking place, on the other side. And even when he died, chance to think that what if he had lived for, let's say, 30 odd years later, when it was the British that finally established themselves as the dominant colonial power. And just as then, there would have been lanterns would have been moving around with a theodolite measuring the earth, and it would have been that kind of influence that came.
Just imagine if Jai Singh was born a century later, maybe with his scientific bent of mind, with his resources at his.
But he would still have had to be king and, not get murdered by somebody.
You're transplanting if you lose your imagination.
And you need all those beneficial circumstances too, right? That allowed him.
Have all the resources.
Yeah. Imagine if he had, if there were like English astronomers and all, I know Newton's contemporaries, or what if Newton, one of those guys himself, what if they just made a trip to India and it would have been different.
Too many what ifs to consider, Jacob. Jai Singh died in 1743 at a young age of 57. Lieutenant Colonel James Todd, that I mentioned, who wrote about the Rajputs, wrote this on his death. His numerous wives, concubines, and scions expired with him on his funeral pyre.
The science too.
Yeah, that's what he's written. That he basically writes that Jai Singh's movements irradiate a dark period of Indian history. And he was basically, what he's trying to say is that he was the lone light in that very, very dark era of Indian history where there was no science. But that is again a very British view of looking at
absolutely
things. So we have to take it with a pinch of salt. But yes, what does make me cringe is the fact that he like most of the Rajputs of that era, Rajput kings of that era, despite all his scientific outlook, on his death, all his wives and his harem, the women of his harem, died with him on the funeral pyre. And that just...
because as we said, all of these astronomy and astrology were again conducted in very, very religious context. There was this whole distinction between science and religion is a debate that would start nearly 200 years later. So it is, I mean, none of this is a very small, this is like a fringe, artsy kind of activity with its own importance, but it is still in a different cultural domain. In fact, just after his death, his brother's grandson, Pratap Singh, he also to some extent maintained some of these observatories. But ultimately, one of the observatories was turned into a gun factory for castling and boring cannon, because by this time, the political dynamics had completely changed, wars and a different kind of technology and science was being favored for pure survival, for pure survival aspects. So a couple of his descendants did this honorable task of maintaining his thing. Some of his descendants were also, I believe, fairly interested in it, but nobody nurtured it and nobody invested as much time and resources into it as Jai Singh. And then after that, as you said, these things just basically disappeared, not even to make an impression.
Yeah, and right from, if we go to the very beginning, at 1803 itself, the monument seemed to be
In disuse already.
disuse.
Absolutely. So, Shobna, that was quite a grand tour de force into this very, very little known king. I mean, known king, but into a very little known aspect of his. And it was a lot of fun. And I hope our listeners too are as fascinated as we were when they discover these aspects of the builder of Jaipur.
And the builder of Jantar Mantar. Thank you, Jacob. That's all we have time for. I'm Shobna K. Nair. It's goodbye from me.
Thank you, and keep listening.